Boerne Radio 103.9 FM. Coming up at 10:30, it's Ceasefire with Dale Adams and Ron Cisneros. But right now, time for the Ascent with Sam McGee. This show is sponsored by Crestmont Private Wealth, and this is Boerne Radio.
The opinions expressed are those of the host. The material is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice, and it is not intended as an endorsement for any specific investment. Visit CrestmontPW.com for more details.
You are listening to The Ascent with Crestmont Private Wealth. I'm Alec Walker, EVP of Financial Planning in our Houston office. Joining me today is the CEO Sam McGee. Today we're going to be discussing an interesting financial planning or behavioral finance topic, talking about sudden wealth syndrome. So, Sam, maybe tell us a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, first off, it sounds like a very first world problem because, yes, it is, but it is a real thing. I mean, it actually is a genuine syndrome. If you Google it or type it into ChatGPT, you could pull this up, and it's actually a psychological condition that happens when someone unexpectedly or unpreparedly comes into a large sum of money.
And what generally happens? What is the effect on their personal life? Because you would think, okay, I've come into a sudden wealth event. Things become a lot easier at that point. Maybe stresses that you have go away, financial concerns that you have, such as, am I going to be able to afford that house that we've always wanted to, or going to be able to retire when I want to? Those problems seem to go away.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, you hear the old adage a lot of money does not create happiness, and it's true. It really is. You see some very miserable, very wealthy people, and you see some very happy, wealthy people. And it kind of depends on their level of gratitude and also their level of preparedness, especially in this situation of sudden wealth syndrome. So just to give a few examples of what sudden wealth syndrome would be, it could be an inheritance that was unexpected. It could be a lottery win. It could be a financial settlement. It could be even divorce. It could be, divorce from a very high income earner and suddenly receiving a large pot of money. Any kind of financial windfall, a large contract for a really good athlete. And while that may seem like a really positive thing, it can actually lead to a lot of emotional and psychological challenges for people. Just a few of them. Guilt. So you wouldn't think that maybe many of our listeners would feel guilty about receiving a large amount of money, but if it didn't come with a lot of effort or perceived effort, you could have quite a bit of guilt.
I could see that. You're kind of like, did I really earn this? Do I deserve this on a...
Right. I guess it depends on the situation, but yeah, I mean, someone that was kind of in the lucky DNA club and received a massive amount of money and maybe the other sibling was cut out of the will. Yeah, there's probably quite a bit of guilt in that situation. The other symptom of that could be anxiety and stress, fear of making the wrong call, or I should do something proper with this because this was my granddad's money. And it's interesting how people treat money differently versus earned versus received. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where a lot of that anxiety and stress can come from. Some other notable symptoms are paranoia, worrying about being exploited and taken advantage of, and impulsive spending too. If you really think about some of the cautionary tales of some professional athletes, not to pick on just athletes, it could be lottery winners and the lucky DNA club too, as I call it. Yeah, it's true. So, when you think about them going out and maybe they receive 10, 20, $30 million, and you would think, oh, wow, what a great opportunity to set up your life.
Your families, generations,
charities around you, be a good steward. That doesn't always happen. And so that impulsive spending sometimes can happen because there is a perception of wealth that what is true today will go on forever. And you see that with reckless spending in this sudden wealth syndrome where, you hear about these cautionary tales of professional athletes. I think there was one from the Astros, in fact. Was it J.R. Richards?
Maybe so.
I think it was. At one point, I think maybe he was homeless. We're going to have to fact check that later. But, I remember reading about how he was actually homeless for a period after having a huge contract. So that impulsive spending or not knowing how to handle it, it's a real issue.
So what's the main thing that causes this sudden wealth syndrome? Because, it doesn't affect everyone. There's probably some people that are capable of handling that, but what's the main cause of it?
I think there's probably about half the listeners right now are probably laughing because they're going, gosh, if I won the lottery, I'd be good. I'd be good to go. Or if my rich uncle in Brewster's Millions left me tons of money, I'd know exactly how to spend it. And that's probably true for probably a good handful of the listeners out there. But the contributing factors are a lack of financial literacy or experience in managing a lot of money. It can be a pretty stressful thing. I mean, imagine that you're given the keys to a large corporation today. We run a boutique, medium-sized business, but all of a sudden, if I'm tasked to run a multi-global organization, the stressors are going to be different. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with money. Mm-hmm. The people that have 10, 20, $30 million, it's like a full-time job of managing your accountants, your estate planner, your meeting with your financial advisor, keeping people at bay that need your support and help, both legitimate and not legitimate. So some of the contributing factors are lack of financial literacy, lack of boundaries, how to handle the influx and what to do with it. Also, the pressure to help friends, charitable causes, and family. And I think that's a very real thing as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure then fear comes into play where you're thinking that, okay, people are going to try to take advantage of me. And I think that's probably one way to alleviate that is to have people around you that you trust, whether it's a trusted advisory team that can help you set out a financial plan, that can give you candid advice in your best interest on how to make the proper decisions for that money, or to even encourage you in some situations, if you're hesitant to spend that money, to let you know that, hey, you can enjoy it. You don't have to just keep it protected and sheltered forever. You can use it in responsible ways. And that's why, having an advisor, an attorney, an accountant that's going to have your best interest at heart is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, sudden wealth syndrome is something that is very real and something that can be navigated. But I think you're right. I think the biggest piece is surrounding yourself with people of trust. Also protecting your privacy. There's a reason why lottery winners don't go to the internet and say, hey, guess what? I won the lottery. They typically take a bodyguard, up to Austin to the commission and let them know they won. So there's a reason for that. And the amount of stress that does come with being wealthy for some that didn't have wealth right before is extraordinary. So some of the things you mentioned, one, I just want to highlight, having a budget. And going from living off, say, 50, 60, 100,000, 120,000 a year, whatever your spending is, and suddenly you can live off of 500,000 a year. That can get carried away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a lot of things I could have on my to-buy list with that type of budget. Thinking through who's listening to this, there's probably fewer than a handful of athletes or even less lottery winners. But I think the biggest thing of people listening to this could experience this is from an inheritance. And, what's going to be happening over the next 20 to 30 years, the great wealth transfer, as it's called, is estimates between 84 to 90 trillion dollars are going to be passed from baby boomers to the next generation.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That's to Gen X, to millennials late, after that. We're talking about people coming into significant sums of money potentially and changing their lives in the middle of their careers and trying to figure out, what do I do with this? What do I do? Does this change my plan? And that's probably the most relatable thing that's going to happen.
It is. And that's something that you and I have both seen at Crestmont. Unfortunately, it's a part of life. Experienced quite a few clients with passing parents or spouses. And sometimes that does involve sudden wealth, thinking through how to treat it, what to do with it, and how to navigate that is emotionally as important as it is financially important.
Yeah, and it gets back to the multi-generational, family planning that we discussed. So whether you're a millennial, Gen X, and you've got elderly parents, or you're elderly and you've got young kids that are working right now, reach out to us, reach out to a financial advisor and have that conversation. We work with many retirees and their children that are still working and have, as appropriate, open and candid conversations about whether the parents are wanting to do some of that wealth transfer now while they're still alive and what the plans are when they're no longer here and what their intentions are and what they want their kids to do. It's important to start having those conversations sooner rather than when it's too late.
Yeah, I think you illustrated something really interesting. We've been talking about sudden wealth syndrome, but it doesn't have to be sudden. If there's planning involved with inheritance or maybe selling a business or an IPO where you work, you can plan for it and may make it a lot less stressful. Alec, maybe just in closing, will you share a little bit for our listeners who are not clients, how we handle our family billing structure and how may that relate to mitigating some of this sudden wealth syndrome that may happen with inheritance?
Yeah, so the way that we handle our family billing structure is that we consider the entire family portfolio. So whether it's the parents, the children, the grandkids, depending on the ages of the entire family, we bundle the entire family portfolio and consider it one household. So what this does for maybe those younger folks that are just starting their careers, they're able to benefit from the services of Crestmont Private Wealth at a much more affordable rate by getting that discounted family bundle.
And they keep all their financial affairs completely separate and confidential, but they're just really getting a better price point.
They're getting a better price point. Everything remains confidential and separate, and only to the extent that the generations want to share that information amongst themselves.
No, that's great. Alec, I'm sure we could talk more about this one on another show, drilling down on inheritance or maybe sale of a business, but hopefully we've imparted a little bit of wisdom for the people out there listening. And if you did win the lottery or you did sign that big contract, how would they reach you, Alec?
You can find us via info@crestmontpw.com or on our website at crestmontpw.com. Have a great day.